Hey, great day, everyone. It's CJ. Hopefully, everyone's having a fantastic day so far. It is Wednesday, December the 28th, and very excited to be delivering our end of the year show. It is the Rogue News 2022 recap, and then also 2023, the forecast, the look ahead. Very excited and honored to be hosting. V will be joining here shortly, but very excited to be hosting today. Just a massive amount of talent. And I'm going to share the links. They are in the descriptions to the video. So today we have Tim Kirby with Tim Kirby Russia Hardcore. You can check him out on his Telegram. Like I said, the links are in the description, so you can make sure to check out.
And my Telegram is even right below me right now for the entire episode because I want people to join up.
So there you go. So there you have it firsthand. And also we have Matthew Ehret with us with the Canadian Patriot Review. Several other different links to host in there, but I think that's his primary site to check out his books and all that kind of good stuff. And also with us is returning guest Martin Sieff. Martin, you can follow him over on his Twitter handle, which is over at Martin Sieff. And then we also will have joining here shortly is Alex Krainer will be joining us. I have his Substack link. And then all of you are very familiar with the Gorilla at roguenews.com. With that being said, gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for being here today. To honor and a pleasure to be hosting this roundtable.
Oh, and we're glad to be here. I think. Looking over there at you, Matt.
I concur. It's an honor to be in the room with you guys.
Yeah, I also want to thank the people in the chat room. Very lively crowd. Please do us a favor. Make sure to share the live stream. It's heading into all of it. There should be a lot of people right now that should be tuning in live. But gentlemen, I thought we could kick things off just talking a little bit around 2022. Perhaps maybe some of the moments and throughout the year that were probably the most instrumental in terms of shaping the course of the year. I know probably everyone's probably going to say Ukraine. There were a few other things, but I thought we could just kind of go around the horn if you want, and also maybe if there's other additional links or something you want to talk about what your work is. Let's go for it. So let's start with Tim, and then we'll just go around the horn. So Tim, go for it.
Yay! All right. Well, I can tell you one thing. About a year ago, I believe it would be January 10th. Now, don't quote me on that. I could be off by a couple of days. That was the day when the United States officially rejected all of Russia's proposals to renegotiate basically the balance of security within Europe. Essentially, Russia kind of wanted to move things back to something like NATO's sort of organizational level at about 1997, and Washington said no to absolutely every demand and concern the Russians had, which marched us into war about a month after that. So I definitely think that the complete and total rejection of Russia's offer without even any willingness to negotiate was definitely the sort of big thing if we're going to talk about year in review, which led to the special military operation, which is essentially the event on February 24th, one day after Men's Day in Russia, which many people might not know. On the 23rd, we celebrate all men in Russia, especially men who've done their service. So who knows if that was by coincidence or by plan or maybe a bit of both. But on the 24th, that's when the special military operation started. And two things happened. One, the tanks of the special military operation were somehow able to kill the COOF or other diseases, which you're not supposed to mention on YouTube. So the COOF died. That was number one. And number two, the monopolar world order possibly died as well. So Russia's tanks have shells designed to fight diseases and monopolarity in geopolitics. So very impressive. And I think that was sort of like going like back in time exactly 1 year. I have a whole little list of events that are for Russia, but I don't want to dominate the whole hour here. But I do think that those are events that have changed the lives of people, maybe over the entire world, probably.
Yeah. Yep. Very good. Very good. And want to welcome the gorillas in the house. So welcome, V.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen. How are you? Good evening.
Good morning.
Howdy, Eddie.
Good to see all of you.
Yeah, so we kick things off, V, by talking about 2022, some of the events that unfolded that really shaped the course of the year, kind of going around the horn a little bit. And then we're going to go to Matt, Martin, and then we'll go back to you, V. Is that cool?
Sure. Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
Okay, go for it, Matthew.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I completely concur. I mean, Tim really nailed it in terms of the nerve center, I think, of the thrust of history that is being shaped or that has been shaped, especially in 2022, and that is going to continue to reverberate through 2023 and beyond. I think, yeah, most definitely, I would reemphasize the importance of the consolidation of the multipolar alliance. And I mean, just a couple of weeks before the military intervention was begun into Ukraine, it's very important to hold in mind that the new era of economic relations in the new era, that whole 5,000 word program was signed by the leadership of both Russia and China together. Let me get the exact wording of that. It was the joint statement of the Russian Federation and People's Republic of China on the international relations entering a new era, and this really outlined the foundation upon which a new viable economic and ultimately security architecture would be continuously based. And this is obviously something many years in the coming. It's been building up laterally, subtly, but it's really, it doubled down fast as it became more and more evident that there wasn't all the time in the world before the financial blowout of the West occurs. So in the last 8 months, what we've seen coming out of the consolidation of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has been very, very important. New members have expressed their intention to join. New members have joined already. Many rivals have been brought online onto a common page regarding, obviously Pakistan and India became members in, I think it was 2019. But now you have nations like Saudi Arabia increasingly stepping on board. Egypt has expressed their intention to be on board pretty soon too. Algeria, and a lot of these same countries are also looking at joining the BRICS Plus, which is obviously, it's an institution which is an underdefined process. Obviously, it had some questionable origins back in 2001, 2002, with some Goldman Sachs brainiacs who had an idea of creating a new bubble with a weak link in the form of the Brazilian biofuels bubble and Banco Santander, which was a major weak link in the game. But increasingly, what we've seen in the last, especially 5-6 years, has been a much more viable idea of physical economic development, which is not tied to speculative financial instruments that could blow up in your face at any moment. There's the actual orientation towards building real things in the real world that define the value of the behavior of money, the purpose of business, of investments. The Belt and Road Initiative is a big one, which obviously is giving vitality to a lot of nations, including Gulf states, which are increasingly jumping out of the unipolar cage, where they don't really see that they have much of a viable future, and are ultimately, and I think Saudi Arabia has realized that they are much more disposable than, they're not as essential in the long-term strategy as they once thought they would be, or what they were once promised.
One thing that always mystifies me is, why do so many small countries think that they can be naughty and misbehave and that they won't get it?
Yeah,
I mean, even complete and total submission to the sort of Davos World Economic Forum, New World Order crowd. Total submission is not even enough.
Yeah, just hubris and arrogance. So anyway, exactly. It's I think a lot of slaps of reality are hitting a lot of smaller countries that have been confused about what their long-term interests actually are, and that's good, because there again is increasingly a viable ship that can float. Sergei Glaziev is playing a key role in that. So I think that these sorts of things are really shaping the coming years ahead, and that's what I would just throw out there.
Yeah, thank you for that, Matt. We also want to welcome Alex Krainer to our roundtable live stream. Hey. So welcome, Alex. Appreciate you joining, sir.
Thank you. Apologies for being a little bit late.
Alex, you're not late. You're always fashionably on time.
One event that also happened during the last year, the problem is I forgot the day and the month of this one, but the Samarkand summit, which ties into what Matt was saying, when essentially the entire multipolar world had that one very big meeting in Uzbekistan. And I think that a lot of maybe that was sort of the finalization of a lot of planning and negotiating between the Russians and the Chinese, and a lot of different parties all came together, because I think that summit wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the war. I think it really changed everything, and that is essentially they probably what was really agreed with there. We're only going to maybe see the fruits of that in the next few years. So another event we should not ignore for this year.
Absolutely. So, Alex, we're talking a little bit around 2022, recapping the year, the events that really shaped the course of the year, going around the table, if you will. So Martin's next. We'll go to V, and then we'll go to Alex. So, Martin, you're up.
Okay, well, I'm in full agreement with everything that the guys have said so far, especially, obviously, Tim and Matt. Ukraine is the driving force. It's driving history. And because of the way we are reacting to it and pouring gasoline on the flaming fire we ourselves set off, it's getting worse, and it is threatening world peace and the survival of human civilization, especially across the entire northern hemisphere of the globe. It is that bad. This is point one. Point two, Matt made a very interesting set of points that I want to flesh out a bit more. Where are these new countries joining the SCO? They are not in Eurasia anymore. All the Eurasian major nations have already signed up. We are now looking at Saudi Arabia, the most financially important nation in the Middle East and the heart of Islam, the guardian of the holy places of Islam. And we are looking at Egypt. These nations since 1975, since the assassination of King Faisal, very specifically in 1975, that was the key event that for 47 years tilted the United States into tilted the Middle East nations under the hegemony totally of the United States. And there have been endless wars and bloodbaths and destabilizations across the region since then. There have been areas of enormous growth too, of course, in Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf, especially the partial recovery of Lebanon. But we've had the invasion of destruction of Iraq. We've had the destruction of Syria. Now we see the continuing destruction of Yemen, the destruction of Libya. The list goes on. And Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, for his own reasons, which are very evident to all, does not like or trust the President of the United States, Joe Biden. Of course, it goes deeper than that. He sees the whole thrust of American policy. But basically, the Saudis have always, even to a larger degree than other nations, emphasize the importance of interpersonal relationships and trust. This is true among Israelis as well as Arabs in the Middle East. You cannot understand 40 years of peace between Syria and Israel without understanding that Yitzhak Rabin and Hafiz Assad of Syria privately trusted and respected each other and worked together both against American initiatives they both distrusted, but much more especially against Yasser Arafat, who they both loathed. And of course, Rabin was assassinated precisely when he was looking to finalize the long, then 25 years old de facto peace between Israel and Syria. And he was assassinated, very conveniently, of course, before he could push that through. Now, what we see now is Mohammed bin Salman, the son of the king of Saudi Arabia, the real ruler and very definite ruler of Saudi Arabia, does not trust Joe Biden as far as he can throw him. How shocking of the leader of Saudi Arabia. And the general president of Egypt feels exactly the same way. They both have reason to. But these are the two nations that guarantee stability such as it is and security and financial framework of the entire Middle East. And it isn't Israel they have the problem with. It certainly is not Russia or China. It is the United States of America. And of course, they have no faith in Europe to act as any kind of counterpoint or counterweight to this. Because as we've seen again and again, in geopolitical terms and moral force, Europe is useless. America has totally castrated Europe, has totally castrated the leaderships of Europe. And now that brings me to my one other point, which is again a knockoff point from Ukraine. Tim is absolutely right. And so, of course, are you, Matt? Ukraine drives history. And what it is driving now is the deindustrialization and collapse of Western European society at the behest not of Russia, not of Saudi Arabia and the Arabs, not of China, but at the behest of the United States. Part of this appears to be deliberate. I think also, and I'd be interested to seeing the assessments of colleagues here, I think, follow this much more closely than I do, how much of it is, as I personally believe, also the result of mad science, false science, crackpot ideas, what Matt would call the Malthusian delusions, the hatred and war against science, rationality, and against advanced technology, because we have a knock-on effect here. And I do believe that even the so-called geniuses in their own imagination who are bringing this to pass, because they three-quarters believe their own lies, do not realize the full consequences of this, of what they are doing. Yeah. But we are heading back to firewood economies in Germany and possibly in France too, and northern Italy. We are heading towards firewood economies. And when that happens, there's going to be an awful lot more carbon in the air, and there's going to be a lot less trees left around because they're going to have to be burned to keep people warm.
Yeah.
Going back to very basic things here.
Yeah. Very well said, Martin. Appreciate that. V, you're up, please.
Great analysis by everybody here. I want to thank all you guys first and foremost for being on the program. I think everybody on the panel nails it correctly. The West is in a terminal. It's in a terminal velocity, and I've said this often, many times. It's in a terminal velocity that it simply cannot escape from. And unless something miraculous happens, which I'm not holding my breath for, there's a terrible. We're entering a period of calamity, the likes of which Western civilization has not seen since the Dark Ages. And I think that's exactly, Martin hit it on the nail on the head when he said we're heading to a firewood economy. He's absolutely right. I've seen videos coming out of Switzerland, miles and miles and miles of chopped firewood on roadsides that you can go as a family person, get some firewood for your family in order to keep yourself warm this summer. Poland is lining up to get, coal for the winter, and there's a coal shortage over there. So it's incredible to see this. And the question becomes, how much further suffering will the ideologues in the EU push their populations? How much further suffering are they willing to put their populations through just so that they can be the lapdogs of Washington? That's the whole entire thing here. And the U.S., I mean, it's rightfully so for Ben Salman, for MBS not to trust the United States, for the president of Egypt not to trust the United States. I think Sergei Lavrov said it best. The United States is agreement non-capable. If I was a country, I would not trust the U.S. as far as I could even throw the U.S. How do you deal with a nation like this that is right now has told its allies, quote unquote allies, right, to get into a suicide pact and kill themselves? It's incredible to see this, CJ. It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, your thoughts on 2022 and the events that really shaped the course of the year. Go for it, sir.
Well, obviously, the war in Ukraine is I think the biggest event that we've seen, and I think is going to prove the event with such far-reaching consequences that we can only guess at the moment. But I see as a very real possibility an unraveling of the European Union. I think that the way the Russians are conducting the conflict is going to put the EU on the defensive, inevitably. There's a very high likelihood that Russia will sweep through Ukraine, take over the Black Sea coast, including Odessa, that they will move to the borders of the Dnieper, and that they will leave the Western Ukraine kind of as a trap for Poland, which apparently a lot of people in the Polish leadership are extremely anxious to take the bait.
Yes.
Very probably what they will find there is a concentration of Ukrainian Banderists, people who hate the Poles only slightly less than they hate the Russians, or maybe not even slightly less.
Exactly, Alex.
And I think that Poland will be supported in this misadventure by their British allies and by the Americans. Another step towards detonating a broader conflict in Europe and weakening Europe even further. So it works for the Brits, it works for the Americans. So that's that much more likely to happen. I think that the Germans will find themselves, are already finding themselves with only one European power that they can work with and that they can actually be friends and allies with, and that's Russia. Because we've seen what their allies, the United States and the UK, have done to Germany. My contention has been that the attack on Nord Stream 2 pipelines was a work where the top of the list of suspects is the UK, United States, Poland, and Ukraine, probably in that order. But the UK being maybe one of the most enthusiastic sides that's formulating the strategy and the agenda. So Europe is headed for something of a perfect storm. This is happening amidst a general economic crisis. The mood of the population is extremely sour. There's an annual poll conducted by Ipsos, which asks some 24,000 people in 36 nations how optimistic they feel about the future, and questions like that, economic problems, social problems, employment, inflation, all of those things. And normally, when they ask people in various countries whether they feel that the next year will be better than the last year, something on average between 75 and 80% of people always think that the next year will be better. Well, this series has dropped by 12 percentage points, which looks just like a collapse on the chart.
Exactly.
And this is dry tinder for social uprising. And the most pessimistic people are people in the Northwest Europe, Belgium, France, Germany, and so forth. So there's going to be very likely social uprisings in Europe. There's probably going to be some kind of a repression response on the side of the authorities. I don't know how they're going to do it or what they're going to do, because I see that they try a lot of gambits that ultimately don't work out. Nothing happens, with these pandemics. They keep trying to enshrine lockdowns, mask wearing for essentially forever, and then nothing happens. Nothing happens. So I think that their ability to mobilize their troops to keep this juggernaut rolling on has kind of petered out. I don't have a different explanation for it, but the Germans wanted to pass through the parliament the obligation of wearing masks. They wanted to make it something of a permanent thing that goes from I think October through March every year.
Yeah, that's correct.
Forever. And that failed. In France, they wanted to extend the electronic survey, the QR code passes for people who are vaccinated and compliant.
Yeah, the vaccine passports.
Yeah, the vaccine passports. That failed. That failed in the French Parliament. So I think that their capability to manage the situation has deteriorated very considerably. But they have millions of Ukrainian refugees coming their way. They're mostly coming to Poland and Germany. This is going to be a huge destabilizing factor, because those nations are already coming apart at the seams with the immigrants that are already here. And so I think that the outcome is going to be very hard to predict, but I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that we're headed for very, very turbulent waters.
Yeah. Alex,
I'd also like to mention something that I came across 2 days ago, a quote, and I asked Matt yesterday to help me out, because there was a quote by Mao Zedong from 1971 that somebody posted on the internet, and then another Twitter follower confirmed that it was true. And I wanted a second opinion, so I asked Matt. But I have to read out this quote to you because I think it's extremely interesting. So Mao Zedong in 1971, so 51 years ago, said as follows: "In another 50 years, China will be very strong. America will most likely be very envious and restless, but it doesn't dare attack China. It will research germ contamination instead. After it finishes with this unconscionable deed, it will self-destruct." Now, I hope and pray.
Prophetic.
So you're saying that's you confirmed real by someone who actually speaks
Yeah,
Chinese?
yeah. Well, that was
all over the Russian internet. And I kind of thought it was fake, but I didn't have the means to check it.
Yeah, no. Our friend Dr. Quan Le had a review of it as well. He confirmed, but he said that there was one small adjustment that wasn't properly translated, which is that he said where it says it will self-destruct, it should be after the imperialists finish with this unconscionable deed, they will self-destruct. Which changes the flavor a little bit. It's not just the U.S. It's something more than a nation. It's the imperialists.
It's the cabal.
Yeah, it gives you a little bit more of a concise idea of it. Yeah,
that's prophetic.
Yeah. It's I find this amazing, and I also thought at first it was a fake.
Yeah,
but it was very quickly confirmed that the gist of the message is correct, and I'm very glad for the correction that Matt got, because I was going to say I hope and pray that Mao Zedong was wrong about the United States, because I think that the preservation of the United States as a union is absolutely critical to the future of humanity. But absolutely, the cabal has to fall and self-destruct, and it feels like they're doing the best that they can to actually fulfill this prophecy.
Yes,
because they've gone off the deep end. They're just like, I don't even find words to describe. This is just the lunatics in charge of the asylum.
Alex, thank you for that. Martin, you had raised your hand for a
moment. Yes, a couple of points. First of all, I am clearly by far the oldest one here, and I am old enough to remember that Mao's comments in 1971 are accurate, were widely disseminated by official Chinese news media at that time. I could not confirm the precise details. I have no doubt that the precise definitions, corrections that Matt quoted are necessary and accurate. But I can testify that these comments were what no one around the world, I heard them too. I was too young to be in the news business, but I was supposedly of a sentient age. And I can testify that they were widely reported at the time in 1971, during the era of the Vietnam War. Remember also, this was when the Chinese still feared the United States before the Nixon-Kissinger outreach to China to try and play off China against the Soviet Union, which they succeeded in doing. The one other person I will quote, believe it or not, in support of all this, was a famous comment that Henry Kissinger, of all people, I believe, made to King Faisal not too long before King Faisal's tragic and unforeseeable end in 1975, killed by a nephew who'd spent a lot of time in California, where he was exposed to and susceptible, of course, some very potentially interesting influences. But Kissinger, when accused of being paranoid, a paranoid Jew, and of course, Henry Kissinger was never an observant Jew in the slightest. In his later life, he used the identity a little bit when it suited him, but to him it was an irrelevant thing. But Kissinger said, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean people aren't out to kill you. The problem is that our leaderships over the past 70 or 80 years have turned the rest of the world, especially nuclear powers like Russia and China and Iran. We have worked overtime to make them paranoid because we have been trying to destabilize them or destroy their countries or kill them. And as Matt, one last point, as Matt knows, largely through my creative exposure to Matt and his colleagues, I've been reassessing over the past couple of years the 19th century history of the spread of open markets and so-called democracy as a screen or excuse for empire around the world. And from South America, across Africa, across all of Russia, India, and China, and eventually, and last of all, the Middle East, this was deliberately used to completely fragment and destroy previously stable societies, bringing generations of suffering on tens of billions of human beings over the past 200 years. And the scale of this and the systematic nature of it is actually a matter of public record, but nobody looks at it. It's not even been suppressed. People have just conditioned not to look at it and draw the obvious conclusions.
And I'd just like to jump in and say, tying into what Alex was saying, and V, and just Martin too, about a sort of combination with the leadership of the West. You can't make a deal with them, and they may also be insane. One huge event that just happened recently was the Merkel admission, that Angela Merkel admitted that they never had any intention of following the Minsk Accords.
Unbelievable.
Exactly.
That they knew where this was heading. She admitted that the entire Western leadership who was involved in this absolutely knew that this was heading to a war with a nuclear power. That's our Madness of the Year award, possibly. I don't know. We have to create up like a poll or something, but it's a contender.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, very awesome. Gentlemen, and I'll open it up to anyone that wants to. What are the off-roads? What are the off-ramps with Ukraine? Any thoughts on does Zelensky stay in power? Are there any off-roads or off-ramps that potentially could happen to save the existence of Ukraine as it is currently? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
That's you want to you know what, I'm going to reserve actually my commentary. I'm curious to see
if I may. I think that in light of everything that we've discussed now, and in light of the fact that the West is agreement and treaty incapable, I think that there's no way that Ukraine is going to be preserved in its current form, because the Russians cannot sit at a table with their Western counterparts, and obviously there's no point discussing with Ukraine when the real power is in London and in Washington. They cannot iron out a treaty with an unreliable partner, and so they have no choice but to go all the way. And I don't just mean all the way in their conflict with Ukraine, but all the way in their conflict with the cabal that's running this show. They have to completely destroy them. And I think, this is obviously not an explicitly stated goal, because I suppose you can't come out and say this. But it seems to me, by the pattern of behavior of the Russian leadership and of the Chinese leadership, that this is what they're aiming at. We had the this is not so recent. I think it was a year or two ago, about a year ago. I think that the President Macri of Argentina went to Beijing, and he got an explicit statement of support for Argentina's intention to ultimately regain control of the Falkland Islands, which is a strike at the UK. We have apparently some diplomatic overtures between Russia and Scotland. We had yesterday Dmitry Medvedev, which he offered his 10 predictions for 2023 in a Twitter thread, which felt a lot like a trolling thread, but among other things, he said that
looked very real to me. I agree with most of his sentiments.
Like a troll now.
Exactly. But there are a few very, very surprising predictions in it. One of them being that the UK will rejoin the EU, and that Northern Ireland will reintegrate with Ireland proper.
Ooh.
And I can't say that I have any of this on my radar, but it wouldn't surprise me that, the forces in this world that are fighting against the cabal, and I don't know exactly who they are apart from Russian and Chinese leadership. I suspect that there are power factions within Europe, within the United States, within Germany that are on that same side that may be working on this, and that they may be talking to each other. I don't know. They don't write to me, but I'm just kind of watching the developments, and these developments seem very, very interesting to me. And so I would, in the same way that Mao Zedong's prophecy from 1971 might have sounded off the wall and loopy, in that same way, yesterday's Twitter thread by Dmitry Medvedev might sound loopy to many people. But by this point, I have to keep an open mind and think, is Dmitry Medvedev simply trolling the Western establishment, or is there something more to these predictions?
Yeah.
I think there could be a lot more. And the one thing is, we always have to remember that Russia, or at least the Russian leadership, definitely likes to keep those cards close to its chest. And when they come out with information like this, they do so for a reason. If you remember back about 4 or 5 years, right when things were starting to get really bad in the Donbass, and it sort of became, I think, evident that this was going to, for the Russian side, that this was not going anywhere. You know that Putin said that the CIA killed Kennedy in an interview. Like, sometimes I think that when they release their little tidbits of information, they can sometimes do that almost like a sort of like how dogs nip at each other before a fight, before a real bite. So there could be this time, although Medvedev likes to just troll people, I think this time we could say that maybe 3 out of those 10 points are really based on something, on information they have. That would be my guess.
Go ahead, Martin.
Thank you. I enter the points Medvedev made from the area which comes naturally to me, the Irish dimension. And in each of these cases, these trends are real. Medvedev is right to say them, but I think former President Medvedev is making the same, it's not even a full error, but from his perspective, optimistic, from a Western perspective, pessimistic, obviously. But every one of these trends is real, and most of them are irreversible, but we will not see them come to pass immediately in the next 6 months, certainly, and probably not in the next year. For example, the Britain and Europe. Britain cannot exist outside Europe. And at the same time, British politics have been so fractured by the insane Brexit debate that it is politically impossible for the English to swallow their pride and go back into Europe directly. Nevertheless, Boris Johnson is gone. That supreme idiot Liz Truss is also gone. The man we have now is an international banker, an Indian international banker running Britain. And no doubt he has to listen to what the City of London says. But he's not the same mad enthusiast. He will go along with Ukraine and he'll do what he's told to because he doesn't know any better. And he thinks the people who are telling him what to do know what they're talking about. But he doesn't have the same mad enthusiasm that Truss and certainly Johnson and the other maniacs did for nuclear confrontation with Russia, for setting up a murderous fascist dictatorship in Ukraine, for oppressing everything that's left of free speech by shameless demagoguery in Britain, which was, of course, Boris Johnson's pride and joy. So the steam has gone out, the energy has gone out from of the London leadership, at least for the moment. They'll still do what America tells them to, though. That's the first point. Second point is, as long as Victoria Nuland stays where she is, and as long as the current Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor of the United States, where they are, the drive towards insanity will continue. But President Biden is very old. He's turning 80. and his cognitive processes are clearly slowing. He may not be presentable much longer. Kamala Harris, even the most idiotic Democrats, realize is simply a non-entity. I think we are going to see Barack Obama groomed to take over for at least the next 3 years while they play for time and see what they're doing next. On the Republican side, Trump is gone. He's just self-destructed. He really has. And there's no question who the next Republican key figure is. He's already there. He is Ron DeSantis of Florida. He fits the same pattern of Ronald Reagan in 1980, of Franklin Roosevelt in 1932, and of Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1952. He's the consensus candidate of about 2/3 of the country, and the more sensible and responsible, cautious, not moral, but more cautious and alert aspects of the power structure. I think you understand immediately, Alex, very clearly, and he is already emerging. If anything unfortunate were to happen to him, it would be a catastrophe for the United States. And in those circumstances, I think tipping off, destabilizing Texas and the heartland would come much more easily. California would split or destabilize in different ways, because what we see in California is something different. What we see is the mad dream of the globalists and the transhumanists and the hatred of technology crowds crashing down and imploding. You have power crashes in what was for 150 years the most technologically advanced society on Earth. There is even very significant evidence that heavier-than-air powered flight did not start with the Wright brothers or with Graf Zeppelin, but in San Francisco in the early 1890s. A lot of the so-called flying saucer sightings do not fit the sightings of we're familiar with of UFOs over the last 80 years, but fit more the pattern of very primitive airships across North America in the 1890s. The point is, Northern California then and Southern California, since the movie industry went there, became technologically enormously advanced. And yet today we see the collapse and backfiring of this because of mad science and mad dreams and mad anti-technological fantasies. As for my Ireland, it's definitely happening there. Because, and nothing changes in Ireland for 50 years at a time. I'm living proof of that. I lived through the last great changes, and nothing has happened since then, even though they should have, for both good and bad, for the 50 years since. But what do we see now? We see Sinn Féin, the so-called big, bad, radical Irish Republican Party, which the English hate and fear more than they even fear Russia and China. They completely get distorted when they come to Irish Republicans. And Sinn Féin is going to be the next democratically elected government of Ireland unless the election can be fixed. And the Irish electoral system is remarkably honest and open and democratic and transparent. It's so far been very hard to fix it. That results in very quirky and anomalous results in the Irish Republic, but they are democratic and they are realistic. And even in the North, despite all the manipulations of the British government and the Unionist Party, Sinn Féin is now by far the most realistic and largest supporting party in the north of Ireland, with a significant degree of support and rapprochement, even with a middle-class Protestant base, which always shunned it in the past. So what will change, one last point on Scotland. I thought the point about Scotland and Russia is very interesting, because what is not generally noted is how much, again, the city of London and the English imperialists in London hate and fear Scottish nationalism. Now, Irish nationalism is an old and familiar enemy to them. They happily scapegoat it all the time and have done so very successfully for everything under the sun for the last 150 years or so. But Scottish nationalism is a curveball in baseball for them. It's something they never expected, and they don't know how to deal with Nicola Sturgeon, who now has vastly more executive experience in Edinburgh than any leader in the London government cabinet does. They don't know how to deal with her. And the information I have been receiving over the past year is that the intelligence community in London is obsessed with what's happening in Scotland, in Edinburgh, would love to destabilize Mrs. Sturgeon, and is eager to do so. One final point, confirming once again, President Putin has always had this very off-putting, disturbing, destabilizing habit of telling the truth. And when you come to the assassination of President Kennedy, I recommend a book by James W. Douglas, JFK and the Unspeakable. I believe it's called JFK and the Unspeakable, which documents, among other things, the son of Nikita Khrushchev, Sergei Khrushchev, as openly testifying. He's on the record on this, that after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and in early 1963, his father tasked the KGB with trying to keep President Kennedy alive and prevent him from being assassinated by his own deep state. And of course, the KGB were not Superman. They were operating in the United States against another very formidable and extremely well organized and financed super state playing on its home ground, and they failed to do so.
Yeah.
But this, therefore, has been clearly, according to James Douglas's documentation, and Douglas is an outstanding scholar. Read his work, it stands on its own. But what we see here is what President Putin said is not some shocking, quirky lie or comment, oh, he should have kept it, he's saying something that nobody ever believes. It's a crackpot comment. No, this has been the accepted understanding of the Soviet and Russian leaderships over the past 60 years, that this is the way real politics and power operate in the United States of America.
Yep. Thank you for that, Martin. Appreciate it. Matthew or V, would you want to jump into that, Matthew? I know you had a thought in regards to.
I mean, there's so much value in what was just said on so many points, and I think going back to what Alex had pointed out in regards to your original question of is there a way out and off ramp on Ukraine? Yeah, I completely agree with Alex. There's nothing really at the moment that is existent for the Russians to negotiate with. Ukraine had a couple of mild attempts to create some basis of negotiation, even as far as March 2022. And we saw that one of the only people who were somewhat qualified and honest in that ambition, representing the Ukrainian side, quickly turned up dead in the early minutes after meeting with the Russian delegation. So there was nothing really there to talk to, and thus, yeah, you're forced to go for a more kinetic approach at this point, increasingly until reality slaps the West sufficiently that maybe some forces that want to survive can be woken to the appropriate level of magnitude necessary to act in accordance with our genuine self-interest. But I think from my standpoint, and again, everything Marty just said, very interesting stuff. I definitely what Medvedev went through, what he went through, the collapse of the Bretton Woods system, the destruction of the U.S. dollar as the basis of global trade. All of these things are inevitable consequences of the breakdown of the system. And I mean, there's some stuff that Medvedev, I'm sure, was being playful with as well. I think that, though, for me, the most interesting thing is where the ivory tower modeling of the oligarchy breaks down with reality. And the phenomenon of Jeffrey Sachs, especially in recent months, has been an interesting psychological thing for me to watch. When especially you take an appreciation for the broader waves of history, especially in regards to how and why the Hitler fascist transhumanist eugenics project for a global fascist bankers dictatorship in the 1930s. Why was that aborted? How was the strategy that was formerly, there was a consensus amongst the Anglo-American governing class that they would go and double down on that pro-fascist orientation. Leading figures within the British royal family were behind it. Leading, figures within the City of London, within Wall Street, were all fully behind the idea that that Italian and German fascism in some variety would be the dominant, global order in the post-war age. So why was that aborted? Why did Lloyd George, who had ambitions to become prime minister, not become prime minister once again in the mid to late 30s? What about Oswald Mosley? What about the king, King Edward the Eighth, who was ousted under this? He was eliminated for being an embarrassment. Obviously, just really adoring Nazism, but he was also, as it was discovered, encouraging the Nazis to bomb his fellow British people even after the war began, in order to get them to submit and reinstate him as the Nazi king who would work very happily with the Nazis. So why did all of that get aborted? What was that about? And from there, I think it's interesting to see how the oligarchy is really good at scheming and building up a game plan. But when it comes to execution, it tends to always blow up in their face. And then there's some demand by the oligarchy, or at least their auxiliaries, who are able to think a little bit more creatively. Jeffrey Sachs being a very high-level auxiliary. He played a very dominant role. We know his role very clearly in the context of arranging the game plan for perestroika, arranging for various cyberneticist, ghoulish cultists that formerly didn't have any power positions within Russia during the times of Brezhnev. He made sure that these figures and their acolytes would be positioned to be the technocratic managers in the 1990s, overseeing the creation of what became, this monstrosity in the 90s under Yeltsin. So, I mean, that's what Sachs, who is a cyberneticist, he is a Keynesian cyberneticist. He is not a noble character, but despite that, he has been deployed to be a voice of reason. Why does he actually represent handlers who actually believe in this just, equitable, respectful world order of win-win cooperation that he's extolling? I don't think so. But I think that it's recognized that Russia, China, Iran, all of these civilizational forces were never supposed to be in the positions that they are in today. That was never supposed to happen according 100%. To ivory power.
Yeah, we also have to remember that the people who make these plans are very arrogant. And I think that if you're talking about the plans never coming to fruition exactly the way they're planned for, that's because only someone with a truly someone who believes in the Malthusian vision of the future is going to be arrogant and narcissistic. And so they're going to just assume that all of their plans are going to work. Or they're probably going to also fall into the trap that, well, I wrote this on a piece of paper, therefore it'll be executed perfectly to the letter with no resistance, fatigue, sloth, confusion, so on and so forth.
And most importantly, every single one of these Western morons, all of them, forecast into a vacuum. They miss so many things. We're not dealing with evil, diabolical geniuses of the umpteenth level, folks. We're dealing with very mediocre, weak men, weak-minded men. And when you really study them, look, most of these guys, especially when you get into alt media and all these other stuff, these guys are reading white papers that these morons wrote, and they believe the white papers. Like, oh my God, I read the white paper, blah blah blah. This is true. No. There's an entire world outside of the West. And I've said this before. If it wasn't for the multipolar world, if it wasn't for Eurasia, I would have lost hope for humanity. So understand that there's no, that this is some sort of entire global plot with global this. It's not. There's a huge pushback towards this. Go ahead, Martin. Or who was next?
I just want to say that also what you're talking about, very important when we're trying to understand Russia, is the fact that pretty much all information in the West about Russia is fake. It's been so fake for so long that essentially they've disinformed themselves into the madness of thinking, boy, when we attack the Russians, they're going to run out of ammo. They have no military. Their economy is going to collapse because half of the Russian economy is oil and gas, even though the 2014 a sort of economic sanctions versus Russia that they took proved that that's not true, because the logic was, well, if over half your economy is oil and gas, we create an oil and gas crisis, your economy collapses. It did in 2014 and it didn't in 2022, so they should have known better. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. But essentially, we're in this eternal, unending loop of this disinformation. Like on my channel there, Tim Kirby, Russia Hardcore, one guy was saying, well, Russia's facing a demographic crisis in the future. Are you sure? I don't think we even know. We don't know. Everything is just so disinformed that who knows? Because these articles that they always write about Russia's going to have this imminent collapse, Putin is going to be destroyed, this, that, and the other. They always state a lot of facts, but who knows where those facts come from? Anyways, sorry for dominating the conversation. Whoever was next.
No, very valuable input. Martin, go for it.
Oh, thank you. I think Thee and Tim, again, guys, you just nailed it 100%. Now, I'm an Oxford graduate. I have technically two degrees from the University of Oxford. Under the system, it's actually one degree that converts, but it was it was a good degree at a good time. There's a huge difference between Oxford and Cambridge as the two intellectual centers of Britain, and at least initially, though not since for the past 100 years, but before that, of the Western world. Oxford is obsessed with power and politics and human interaction, and is subtle. It has produced twice as many British prime ministers as Cambridge. But you could not have the world of science for the past 400 years without Cambridge. Whether you love them or hate them, Isaac Newton is from Cambridge. I think, isn't Alan Turing a Cambridge man? Rutherford and the development of nuclear technology and research does not come from Einstein. That's a myth. It comes from Rutherford and Cockcroft and the researchers of the Cavendish Laboratory. And of course, in the last 60 years, we have an even more powerful tool to manipulate and shape or distort our future, and that is molecular biology. And it comes from decoding the DNA helix, and where did Francis Crick and James Watson, Anglo-American Alliance again, do it? They did it in Cambridge. And Bertrand Russell is from Cambridge. And Keynes is from Cambridge. And what you find from Cambridge, and Darwin is a Cambridge man. What you find from Cambridge is an obsession with cold, abstract science, and they are the best in the world at it. They pioneered it in so many fields. You could not have the modern world or science without Cambridge science, but they don't relate to human beings. And this explains exactly what Matt was saying, why they have these huge, cold, supposedly mathematical, supposedly logical, brilliant ideas, but humanity is messy, and it is not like that. And I always end up citing my old teacher and mentor at Oxford, the political philosopher Isaiah Berlin, who called himself a man of the left, but it was a very different left from the conceptual left we talk about these days. He loved England. He hated the British Empire, hated it, rejoiced in the end of empire, worked endlessly for that, peacefully and democratically, wanted to dismantle the Soviet Empire in Eastern Europe, again, peacefully and consensually as well. But what was Berlin's central theme? That the attempt to create any perfect utopia for all of humanity, in other words, a unipolar world again. He said any conception of utopia will automatically create a dystopia instead. Any vision of paradise will create hell rather than paradise on earth. Because once you decide your way is the only way ahead for the human race to achieve eternal happiness and security, then you will feel justified in killing and suppressing everyone in your path. And that is exactly what the New World Order people have done. The end of the Cold War was a catastrophe for the human race, because it empowered these people and their spiritual children and grandchildren with the religious fervor and conception of new crusaders, that they and they alone have the ultimate happiness and future and perfection of humanity in their hands, and they are therefore justified in destroying the rest of us.
Yeah. Thank you, Martin. Tim, I think you're getting a little bit short on time here, so did you want to how are you doing, sir?
Yeah, I probably should be going. So, anyways, let me just have some, I guess, final words. One thing that I guess I should mention again, year in review. So, like I said, I kind of put together some notes. One thing I didn't mention was the attack on the Crimean Bridge, which sort of put it out of operation for a debatable amount of days, and the rise of the sort of escalation of tensions, I think, was another important moment. And one important moment that touched a lot of people's lives and mine personally was the assassination of Daria Dugina, who I consider to be a close personal friend. So that's kind of the end of my year in review from a Russian standpoint. And it might sound very monolithic. It's all multipolar world, and it's all things related to the war in Ukraine. But like I've said to people before, one thing to understand Russia is that this whole Ukrainian situation has been the number one news story since, like about 2014. So if you could imagine if in America we had one number one news story for 8 years, one number one cause, number one issue, not the usual cycle, be it something reasonable, like, who knows, taxes, or the fight for or against abortion, depending on your side, or something kind of pointless, like whoever's lives matter and this, that, and the other. But imagine going on for 8 years. So that's an important context. And one thing that Russians want more than anything in 2023 is for this to be resolved, for this to be over with, and especially over with in a favorable position for Russia, but just essentially over with so that way we can move on. Although, guys, I'm having a strong feeling that our excuse me, our friends that have a utopian vision for the future, that, like Martin said, people with utopian visions tend to create hell. They're not going to go quietly off into the night. And so the dream of the Russian masses that, well, we'll take most of the Ukraine, we'll establish a border with Transnistria, that'll basically ensure peace in our time, and then everyone can just be happy in a world that's sort of segregated into two sides, and we can all sing Kumbaya. That is the dream of the Russian masses, but unfortunately, I don't think that is going to be the case. I think we have a ways to go. In fact, Sergei Lavrov actually recently said something about that, something like to do with the dismantlement of the dollar, or like de-dollarization, how that sort of battle has only just begun. I forgot his exact wording, but even with him, he sort of understood, like, was expressing the point that there's a lot of processes that are going to take a long time here. Exactly. And unfortunately, they're only just starting. And whatever the world is going to look like, it's probably going to be in more of a 5-year span rather than a 1-year span. Russians are famous for being patient, but that is patient by being forced to by factors of history, not because people here value patience or want to be patient. Everyone wants this thing to be over, but it's apparently not going to be. So that's all I got, guys. It was great seeing you. I hope you all have a wonderful year this year in 2023. And I also hope to maybe see some of you in Russia. Who knows? I'm not saying who, but who knows?
I might hop over. I might make a hop over from Dubai over to Moscow one of these days. So
absolutely, dude. I just saw it. Gold was 4,000 rubles a gram. Come on, man.
It's coming, man. I'm telling you right now. It's like, dude. I mean, just like 3 weeks ago, we had one guy take one. When I say one guy, it's not one guy. One institution, because I'm on the institutional side of these things. Yeah. We had one institution take down 51 tons in one go. And I call my LBMA, my London Bullion Market Association supplier. I'm like, hey, what's going on? He's like, V, we just had one institution come by. They just took down 51 tons. You're gonna have to wait. I'm like, okay. And I have no problems with delivering metal anywhere in the world. As much as you want, as much as you can take, I can deliver it anywhere.
Oh yeah,
and
well, dude,
that was a big thing.
On a personal note, sometimes people kind of like what personal stories. This year, I literally lost all my life savings and got double back. So I'm kind of trying to buy like a small Moscow apartment. But the gold prices here, there's a little bit of a little sort of, I don't know, maybe we could say Irish leprechaun inside me that saw that today they're selling 1 gram for 4,000 instead of 5,000, which it was like a couple months ago. That is very intriguing. So I don't know.
I think gold is, the price point that we have it settled at, depending how things go in 2023, we have it priced anywhere between $3,300 to $3,600 an ounce on spot. If things get really crazy with the situation in Europe, Ukraine, 4,600 to 5,300 is not, out of the question.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, who knows what the future holds with gold? But anyways, guys, it was great seeing you. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year's and all that stuff.
Thank you for joining. Thank you.
Cheers.
Gentlemen, piggyback off exactly what Tim was talking about in terms of the empire and the exit ramp that doesn't exist. There was an interesting article that came out yesterday, and I'm not sure. Apologize if this is catching everyone off guard, but this apparently was released by Jack Murphy. That he basically shared the fact that the CIA had been using a European NATO ally spy service to conduct covert sabotage campaign inside Russia under the agency's direction. The article goes on in great detail to share how this has taken place, that this covert operation has existed in Russia since basically the Obama era, and now they're basically putting it into play. Now, this article came out, and I always like to wait to see who else is going to piggyback off of it. So Anti-War did carry it as well, which to me that adds a little legitimacy, because I'm sure they have more time than I do to fact check some of these things. But my questioning is the timing, and in the event where the West doesn't see any proper resolution. Are they wanting wanting Russia to actively engage NATO, or are they setting the course for some type of preemptive type strike? Because I think that's on a lot of people's questions in regards to, you hear a lot of people talking about the threat of nuclear war and so forth. So what potentially would the West do in the event that they see that they have no other options, that they've lost the war in Ukraine? And I'll open that up to anyone.
Alex, you want to tackle that one?
No, I'm blank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a. I'm not comfortable with those sorts of things either.
Look, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if it was true, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Russians knew all about this. But honestly, I'm not sure that I have anything to add to that.
What was the question again?
Just in regards to the timing of this article coming out, discussing in detail how the CIA had an operation inside of Moscow already existing, and they're the ones directly responsible for some of the sabotage, some of the recent attacks in Russia. They were leveraging a European NATO ally spy agency to conduct these covert operations. This article came out yesterday.
Did they allude to which European so-called ally? France, England? Who were they?
Let me see here. I can bring the article up real quick so that we can kind of detail it out a little bit. Basically,
I'll take that with a grain of salt, and I'll tell you why. If you guys remember, a few years ago, okay, this was directly from the CIA agency. A lot of the CIA analysts and agents have come forward and said, this was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, probably hot on the heels of the Maidan. And one of the 2 chief complaints that the CIA had, number one, their ever-shrinking operations in Russia because their agents keep getting caught, okay? Number 2, the fact that the Russians, and if you just check back within the last couple of weeks, last few months, ever since the Russians kicked off the special military operation, is that a lot of the Western NGOs, aka CIA front organizations, Western-linked individuals who are of dubious backgrounds and whatnot, were getting captured, were being shut down. So it was becoming harder and harder for the quote-unquote agency, the CIA, to operate in Russia. And the biggest chief complaint of all of it was the fact that the CIA cannot penetrate China. That was a major news that came out a few years ago with the CIA. Russia has been consistently, year after year, just pruning a lot of the Western influences out of it, a lot of Western intelligence agencies out of their society. A lot of the fifth columns are being starving them on the vine, so to speak, choking them out. And China, forget about it. I mean, we've heard, if you guys remember, again, a couple months ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, a large swath of CIA agents and moles and assets were captured, were prosecuted, were executed in China. So this is a big problem. The CIA, this is not the same CIA from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s when they were known as the Cocaine Import Agency. They're not run by some of the smartest tools in the shed, so to speak. And it's not the same Russia and China. Russia and China has gotten much more sophisticated in their anti-intelligence operations, and the CIA has gotten more dumber, to say the least.
Well, V, to be fair, maybe they're not run by the smartest people anymore, but they're more diverse and more inclusive.
That is true. Have you seen the CIA ad where this lady says, I have bipolar schizophrenia, and my pronouns are he and her, and I work for the CIA. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, there you go. So you can't have everything.
No, you can't have everything. But we still lead in the forefront of inventing new genders, which I think is the future market for America, is to create genders, create a digital derivative of this, and use this as some sort of a financial instrument to be traded on a digital currency exchange. That's going to be our biggest export, gentlemen. I mean, the trash and recyclables and cutting it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Martin.
Okay, actually, if I had to speculate, I know nothing about this story until we just had it up here now. But my instinctive reaction is there is only one agency in Europe, in Eurasia, that our agency, the CIA or the U.S. intelligence community, would outsource this to. It would be the Brits.
Yeah.
It's because you have the Five Eyes relationship again. You have this very close relationship, and you have two other factors. First, even back in the Gorbachev era in the 1980s, and I was reporting on this for the Washington Times at the time, the most important intelligence assessments that convinced President Reagan that he could negotiate with or deal with from a position of advantage and strength with Mikhail Gorbachev came from the Brits, because the high-level defectors went to them, because the Brits had dealt with their own internal security agency issues, and they were able to protect Soviet moles who came to them, whereas the CIA through the 1980s and into the 1990s manifestly could not. And for any Soviet or Russian agent who either for love of money or hatred of their country, or for their own versions of idealism, wanted to work for the West, if they went to work for the CIA, they were signing their own death warrants because of the CIA leaked like a sieve, whereas the Brits did not. That's the first point. But secondly, if we look at Russiagate throws an enormous light on this, because Christopher Steele, the former very high level indeed British MI6 or Secret Intelligence Service officer, had previously for 10 years run British intelligence operations in Russia. Now, he proved to be so catastrophic and inept and criminally irresponsible in intervening in the internal affairs of the United States in the 2016 election and thereafter, that heaven knows what havoc he wrought on British intelligence gathering in Russia in Putin's first decade. It doesn't seem to have held Putin and the Russians back at all. But here is a man who ran Russia operations for the British intelligence service, and then becomes intimately involved with the CIA and the FBI and the US deep state in domestic US politics afterwards as well, and has never been adequately investigated. Of course, not by the FBI, but not by the Congress either.
Yep, thank you for that, Martin.
But at the same measure, too, Martin, like, you know, if you were to ask Sergei Skripal or Berezovsky or a variety of other Russian traders,
who kills me, drop a list.
Their future into London's hands, that didn't turn out that well either.
No, it did not, did it? Very good point.
Good, Alex.
I have a question for Matthew, because you know, little bit ago we were talking about the new alliances and what's going to happen with this, you know, fallouts from the Ukraine conflict. Are any movements at all on your radar within Canada in terms of possible partition of Canada?
Yes and no. I mean, right now there's the first relatively competent provincial government that we've seen in a long time in Alberta, which recently took power not more than 2 months ago, which has shown a little bit of actual active resistance towards some of the edicts being imposed onto them from the Great Reset puppets in Ottawa, and that's good. And there's actually a big migration happening into Alberta. I think it's breaking records in terms of how many Canadians. It's like the new Florida for Canadians is Alberta. So that's an anomaly, and it is creating a sort of field whereby Saskatchewan, adjacent to Alberta, Prairie Province, very blue collar, is also winning a little bit of confidence to take a stand too. And there's a certain push to declare or to assert their sovereign authority, because in the Canadian Constitution from the British North America Act of 1867, it's very much unlike any other constitution, because it's not really a constitution, first of all, but it does grant, it's very unique in the sense that provinces have an incredible amount of authority over the control, utilization, and development of their own local resources, that are located within their environment. They're also authorized to make foreign treaties, which is unheard of. I don't know of another government where a province is allowed to make a bilateral.
That's huge, man.
Yeah,
that is huge. That I wasn't aware of this.
Where's Alberta?
Well, Alberta is not indicating at the moment that they're interested in making said foreign treaties, but the fact that they're allowed to do it is interesting. Right now, they're more standing up for their right to choose to, deal with mandates how they see fit, not how they're being told by some detached bureaucrats or experts in Ottawa or Davos, and that's cool. But also, they've taken a stand on the right to control their own utilization of resources. And again, Saskatchewan is coming forth doing something very similar, and there's talk of a West. What's called a Wexit, sort of the Western provinces going for a break. I think it would only kind of work if you also had British Columbia, but that's not going to happen with British Columbia being the LGBTQ, freak show that it is. However, who knows, right? Because things can change quite quickly in the time of a crisis. And we know that British Columbia in 2016 signed a memorandum of understanding with China around cooperation on the Belt and Road Initiative. That was in 2016. That government was disposed, but it was still done as a precedent, and nobody ever revoked it. So you have these different things. You also had, under Trump, towards the last several months of Trump's presidency, Trump did pass an executive order. He was working with the former Albertan government of Jason Kenney to build the Alaska-Canada Railway.
Sure.
Would then connect down into the 48 states with a private company. And it had full support by the federal government of the U.S. as well as Alberta. It would have been great, and Alberta would have been able to do that without having to go to Ottawa. That's why Ottawa was really freaked out. Justin Trudeau's handlers were really scared of this thing because it was also based upon, if you look at the program that justified this highway project and rail project, it was all the China growth market that was justifying its program. All of it was like, you wouldn't do it. There was no financial incentive if it weren't for increasing exports to the China market, especially with the vast resources we have in the Arctic that have to be. I mean, if we really cared about our future, we would start developing roads and rail up there where we currently cannot get to them. Unlike the Russians, who have done a much better job developing infrastructure in the north. So, it's a possibility, and I think if you had a sane, strategic leadership in Canada that was willing to resist this Great Reset agenda, which there is not on the federal level. We have two parties on the federal level, and then I'll stop talking. But you have the Conservative Party, which has finally taken a bit of a stand after the truckers' convoy. For the first time, they grew a bit of balls and actually, at least in words, started standing up to the Great Reset. But again, in words. And then you have the People's Party of Maxime Bernier, which is a smaller party. He was a former cabinet minister under Stephen Harper. He went and created sort of a Canada First type of pseudo Trump like party, which has a lot of really good people. Like the best people that I've encountered in Canada have become members of that particular party. They're your conspiracy theory crowd, right? Regular people who want to have a future. So they're organizable, but ideologically, both the Pierre Poilievre conservatives as well as Maxime Bernier are ideologically absolute libertarians to the extreme, where they see no role for the government in, doing anything economically. So if I actually asked Maxime Bernier at a town hall meeting a couple of months back on film, I asked him, the economy is going to melt down. There's a shockwave that's going to hit us. It's going to cause a lot of death. What do you see as a role of the Bank of Canada as an instrument of, we know that these can be used as instruments of destruction. Government can obviously destroy, but do you see a possibility to use these as instruments of creation as well? We used to build infrastructure. China's still building infrastructure with national banks. Do you see a purpose to that, or at least, protectionism or anything to protect people from the oncoming collapse? And his response was so disappointing, was like, absolutely not. Because he said basically we all know that creative destruction is real. We need to have destruction in order for some synergistic some emergence of a new form of combined which will just emerge. And it's like, well, yeah, maybe that'll emerge, or maybe we'll get a hardcore death cult fascism that emerges too.
Yes, exactly.
How do you just?
And that's the problem with libertarianism. It's such a defensive, laissez-faire point of view. It's unbelievable. It's so
agree.
defensive.
Yeah, that's the biggest mental Achilles heel, I think, is the inability to see how the power of the sovereign nation state could be used as an instrument for good. They can't conceptualize it, and so they can't, and thus they can't understand, why does this oligarchy want to get rid of the sovereign nation state and create a one world government? It's because they see the sovereign nation state as something which can take away their power if it's used under a moral leadership. It happened every time it's been done for the past centuries. It's worked to reduce the power of the oligarchy and defend and emancipate human beings who represent the government and take responsibility for their government. That's the way government is supposed to work, with a national bank or protection. So they have to get that mental block. They got to overcome that, because they're good people. They just can't. So far, they haven't been able to leap over the wall.
No, they can't.
Yep. Gentlemen, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I thought perhaps we could go around the room and talk about 2023 and some thoughts on the road ahead. Who wants to start? Not everyone at once. Martin, you go for it first.
Oh, I was hoping to go second.
Okay, B, go
Alex,
for it.
Go, Alex.
Alex, come on, someone.
Alex, 2023 outlook, buddy. Go for it.
Okay, I'll take the bait. Well, I think Andrew Tate is going to run for president and win the elections.
He's got my vote.
No, I'm joking. Although I did really want to bring up the subject of Andrew Tate, because I'm very confused. Where did this person emerge from, and what is this? I'm suspecting some kind of a psyop, but let's leave that aside anyway for now. So 2023, look, I tend to be incurably optimistic about the future, even though I recognize that it's going to be a bumpy ride for a little while, and I don't know how long it'll take. Yeah. But I do see that humanity is in the best position that it ever has been, because the one thing that we never had and that we have now is this damn internet. Yeah. Which allows us to have these kinds of conversations, to exchange information practically instantly. And I see that at least that segment of humanity that's paying attention and that is questioning the orthodoxies that we, maybe embraced over the years before, when we didn't suspect that we were ruled over by an evil cabal. I think that we are growing smarter by the day, because, anytime any question emerges, the answers coalesce. They almost happen instantaneously. The good example is this quote from Mao Zedong that we just looked at. That came out of nowhere, and a confirmation came with it almost immediately. And I've seen this again and again. And I was a few weeks ago, I was on a podcast with Tom Luongo, who was saying about the same thing. And he said, since he started publishing, a few people who kind of recognized the value in what he was writing started this interaction with him, in a forum or by email, whatever. And they're just complimenting each other. And, he'll come up, connect a few dots, then, he'll get other people adding a few dots, reconnecting them. And he said he's astounded by how much it has upgraded his game and everybody else's. And we all get to read it, to listen to it, agree or disagree, add or, take away what we want. But this is happening at a very rapid pace and in the collective. And I think that the establishment has no answer to this. They have prepared themselves to censor, but you can censor when you have a Tucker Carlson here, a Phil Donahue there, and then if they go off the reservation, you find a way to discredit them, to silence them, or to take them off the air. When it's tens, hundreds of thousands of people, millions, I've started following media from India and from Pakistan who produce very respectable journalism, it gives you another perspective. And so I think that the events will unfold in a manner that is going to be favorable to the emancipation of humanity. And I think that the outcome of this is going to be orders of magnitude better than what we can even imagine. Some people have tried to quantify how much the banking industry extracts in terms of wealth from the economy. Basically the wealth that we create, how much of it is extracted away from us and concentrated in a few hands that then do whatever they do with it. And if that conveyor belt is disrupted, then a huge deal more wealth remains in the hands of the people who can, as they regain sovereignty, decide how that wealth should be deployed and used. And, I would say that 99.9% of us will agree on most things. Everybody wants to live in safe neighborhoods, in nice, comfortable, warm homes, eat quality foods. But, we've lived inside of this matrix for generations. We were born into it. It's basically all we know. Mm-hmm. And so imagining what might replace it as we transcend this phase of history is probably very difficult even for us. We're maybe like, generations of chickens who only lived inside of the chicken coop and don't really know what might happen to us once we step into liberty. But I don't think we're just talking about material wealth. I think we're talking about things that go way beyond that. And so I'm deep inside, I'm very excited about things that are happening. I can't imagine what they might look like. I really do hope that our children and their children will discover it. And I think that's worth everything. I think that's worth every act of courage that many of us, juggle in our heads daily, because we have to always make decisions between what's good for my career, what's good for humanity, what's good for my integrity and my self-respect and so forth. And I think it's worth erring on the side of boldness and courage, because, the way this will impact the outcome of this transition phase is probably has some kind of a crazy multiplier effect. And so to sum it up quickly, I'm very optimistic, and I just think that the more of us participate in this transition and the more of us invest the best of our quality that we can muster into it in whatever capacity we can, the more likely that we prevail over these other people.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Yeah, I would just completely that was very well said. I think overall, if I were just looking, as I think too many people do, myopically only at my immediate surroundings here in our corner of the transatlantic, where I'm based in Canada, and if I was just looking at transatlantic geopolitics and economics by itself, like V said earlier on, I would be a much more depressed person. I don't, thank God. I look at the broader chemistry, as we all do, and I try to train my mind to look at a top-down context always, both in the present space, as far as like the globe is concerned, as a world chemistry, but also in time. So context in space and in time. And knowing where the Achilles heels are located within oligarchical systems. What is the constant anti-creative ideology that the oligarchy is sort of wired to, that transcends generations, right? There's always something that is the same, that always brings about this similar dark age type results every time it's applied, because there's a defiance, a denial of fundamental truths of what natural law is, what human nature is, being it that we are, as a species, part of the universe, right? we're both this, and so we're this whole idea of humanity. We are a subjective, living, feeling creature of conscience that abides according to transcendental, non-expressible values that can't be put into a computer code in some, binary system of digitization. It can't be done. You can't put justice or the soul or a concept of the divine into a computer, though the oligarchy is really committed to doing things like that. They want to try to have a system of absolute controls. And so they just want to always, whether we're talking about the oligarchical systems of the ancient Roman Empire or before that, or in Venice or in England or today's configuration, they're always trying to define the system as a bag of chemicals, of molecules, of atoms that can just be controlled by by behaviorists who can reward or punish according to certain desirable behaviors you wish the system to have. But it's like they deny the reality that we are a creature of conscience and of mind, of creativity, and that's where our soul feeds. And the idea of, I think, the multipolar alliance today, what gives me a lot of hope, looking at the grand strategists, when I read the writings of Sergei Glaziev, who is such an important weapon that has been used, though subtly, in organizing the basis around which the Eurasian Economic Union, as well as its integration with China's Belt and Road Initiative and so many other things. His mind is rich. It is fresh. It understands the nature of the oligarchy, and many of the collaborators that he's been working with in Asia amongst the Chinese leadership think on a very similar high level modality, as do his allies in Russia, obviously, and many others. So, I mean, we're seeing miracles happening whereby, nations who had formerly played a very nefarious role as chess pieces within the great game are finally being given an alternative. Like, there's actual pathways where Turkey is now working with Russia. They're bridging diplomatic bridges with Syria, building up their relationships there. So is Saudi Arabia, and Iran, as well as other Gulf states, are working now to heal their rivalries and past transgressions with Iran. You have, a pipeline being set up right now, or at least there's new things that are moving really fast to provide Russian oil via Turkey into Europe. All sorts of things to give Europe different chances as the crisis deepens and deepens to get into a life raft and save themselves. They're not ready for it yet. The collapse hasn't. I don't think the fire has been felt adequately to sort of wake them up, in the same sense that in 1929, would Americans have understood the need for a New Deal or breaking up the Wall Street banks in 1929 before the collapse? No. I think in some sense, the leadership or the leading factions, the elites within America, as well as obviously many of the people, were not ready for that. They had been too soft-minded, too corrupted by decades of free trade, easy money during the 20s. Really since McKinley's death in 1901, it was 30 years of generally consistent decay on an economic, spiritual level, culturally, in the United States until the Great Depression. So that pain was almost, in some sense, that suffering was the wake-up call for the people to then rally around something that would give them a future. Now, the danger is that it could have been, if you didn't have a Roosevelt, we saw how this formula is used to also get people to rally around the support of fascism. Thank God we had a Roosevelt who rejected fascism. And I think the torch that Roosevelt carried then is currently being carried by the leadership of Russia, China, the broader Eurasian partnership. So that does give us a bunch of pathways. Again, how it's going to manifest, I don't know. It's definitely going to be a character building experience for many of us here, especially in the West. And I'm not comfortable talking about details either. I don't know. But like Alex said, we have to be very strong, be very obedient to our conscience, and have faith that every time that we act in accordance with the truth, we resonate in nonlinear ways that are invaluable, even if our names are not necessarily remembered. The act of standing up for truth and courage will have a resonating power far beyond the limits of our lives, which will have all sorts of effects on the minds of others who, who need examples, role models, and people to stand up and show courage too. So,
yeah, wonderful, Matt. Thank you for that, Martin, and then V.
Okay, I should have started rather than waited because Alex and Matt went huge.
Tough act to follow, Martin. Tough act to follow, bud.
Exactly. And the point is, they both went to vast philosophical issues about the future of the West. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm a skeptic about that. I reflect the Oxford School of A.J. Ayer and Isaiah Berlin in the 1960s. 70s, a great distrust of too sweeping ideas of any view whatsoever because they're too ponderous, they're too all-sweeping, and people are so fond of the great complex intellectual structures a la Hegel, they can never adapt to reality. Ironically, I'm a great believer in the Hegelian dialectic as opposed to the Marxist dialectic, which precisely took the spiritual dimension, which Hegel rightly saw to be of crucial importance, out of it. And the result was we had the sheer brutalistic horror of 100 years of Soviet history, which crushed the life out of the Russian people, and all the other peoples who were along them were also trapped in the system. But when I look at where we are today, for me, I'm with my dear friend Helen Caldicott, the great global peace and anti-nuclear campaigner. We can come back from anything except thermonuclear war. Except thermonuclear war. And we are heading straight forward on a suicidal collision course, daring the Russians, radicalizing them, trying to turn them into the psychopaths of our own darkest imaginations. And the result will be the total destruction of London and Britain, and of America, and of the entire Western civilization. I do believe it's not the end of humanity. East Asia will still be there. Parts of the Middle East, Russia may still be there. Latin America, I think, has enormous potential to lead the world in the future that nobody pays any attention to. And it's about time they did, especially Argentina and Chile, by virtue of both the lessons they've learned from their history and their resources and the abilities of their populations and their geographical location. If I were young enough and spoke decent enough Spanish, I would move to southern Chile or to Argentina, south of Buenos Aires, and I would recommend anybody else here to do the same. I would bet high on those cultures and civilizations. And I think in the short term, at least, the Japanese and the Chinese have enough good sense to try and stay out of any suicidal confrontation. But for me, we're back where we began with Tim, which is the driving force to destroy world civilization at the moment, driven from Washington, is the escalating conflict over Ukraine. It all comes back to that. And I fully agree, alas, with Matt and with Alex, of course. They're absolutely right. Realistically, there is no off-ramp, and yet the off-ramp exists. The off-ramp is the Minsk Accords. And all I can suggest is that we try and it doesn't matter. Again, Helen Caldicott found this. She could put 700,000 people on the streets of New York City and San Francisco, and it didn't make a damn. Because Ronald Reagan ruled in Washington, and ABC television was controlled by Capital Cities, which was an organization created by Bill Casey, who was director of Central Intelligence under Ronald Reagan. And once it didn't matter what millions of people thought in the streets of America. It didn't matter. But what can matter is if you can bring home to the policymakers and even the titular policymakers, the so-called members of parliament in Ottawa, in Washington, in London, as individuals. If you can bombard them every day with the message, you are going to die screaming in nuclear fire. You are going to see your children and grandchildren die screaming in nuclear fire. And it isn't just one crackpot saying it. It's hundreds of thousands of people phoning them and telegramming them and telling them every time they buy a coffee or get into a car. I think that's the only grassroots way that can work. Nonviolent, peaceful, law-abiding, constitutional, the truth, but never let them get away from it and stick it down their throats till they scream and choke. I think that's the only way to do it. And I think you guys here are a God-given start in this. Thank you.
Martin, thank you. You're too kind. Appreciate that. V, closing thoughts, and then bring us home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what everyone said is 100% correct. I mean, right now, I think the next 12 to 24 months are going to be incredibly critical, vital. Martin hit it home when he said that, the risk of thermonuclear war is real. And when you study the psychology of the insane West, when you study the psychology of these nihilistic death cult morons who are running us roughshod into thermonuclear annihilation, it's almost they're a type of civilizational masochists, for lack of a better word, right? They think they're going to survive. They think that out of the fire, out of the chaos, out of the disorder, that they will have their perfect utopia. These people are insane. It is similar to some sort of a end of the world cult that's waiting for a UFO to come along, and they're all got the fruit punch ready and spiked, and they're ready to go to be abducted and taken on board this UFO. And we've seen so much of these doomsday cult, and that's what the Western elites are. They are a doomsday cult, and the thing is, and it's crazy because I look at the Western population, because the Western population, the majority of them have no clue of this. Yes, there's people that are being called out and being confronted, and we've seen that recently with AOC, with individuals linked to the Schiller Institute, calling out Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, when she was out there talking nonsense, and these young gentlemen stood up and screamed, "Hey, you're what's going to matter when there's nuclear war?" And there are confrontations that are occurring like that. But the problem with Americans and the problem with American politicians, we think that we have this advanced, incredible military that'll protect us from everything, and the most greatest superpower the world's ever seen, and we have the largest economy in the world, and we always come out of it. Everything's just a cycle. The market situation we're in, the economic situation we're in, is a cycle. There's nothing cyclical about this. Oh, it's a cycle, all right. It's a civilizational ending cycle.
Yes.
That's the cycle we're on. There's nothing normal, as to, this is just another market cycle or anything like that. Civilizational ending cycle, history repeating itself, America being relegated to the dustbin of history. That's what we're facing. So the question now that the multipolar world, specifically Russia and China, are facing, even talking with countries like India and whatnot, there are murmurs. There are rumors and murmurs right now. Hey, look, we know these maniacs in D.C. We know that these lunatics in London, okay? They're going to probably try to push us to a nuclear Armageddon. How do we stop them? And the answer is very simple. Kill the dollar. And that's going to be the red button that's on the table right now, is nuke the dollar. If they can nuke the dollar, this nonsense stops. It ends. Because once the dollar plummets, it implodes, right? And specifically China is the one that has the capability of doing that, where they can nuke the dollar and its reserve currency status forever. And at that point, there's not going to be enough fuel to move, or nuclear fuel to move an aircraft carrier, to pay a soldier, to procure rounds. And isn't it telling that this Ukraine war had a silver lining? The United States is emptying. They are running low on so much ammunition. It's been revealed to the world what happens when you have a paper tiger go up against an industrial juggernaut. The paper tiger has been screaming, the Russians are going to be running out of ammo anytime now. Next Tuesday at 3 a.m., they're going to run out of ammo. And next Tuesday comes and goes. And then they realize, they're not running out of ammo. What the United States is, they're running out of ammo. We're running out of Patriot missiles. We're running out of HIMARS. We're running out of so many bullets and whatnot, because our leadership are not leaders who say, hey, you know what? We need to look at the logistics. We have X amount of bullets, X amount of missiles. Our production capacity is such and such. We could only produce this much. And now we're realizing we're not an industrial power. We're nothing. And the only thing we have is our nukes. And here's the crazy part. Our Trident 3 missiles are made and entered service in 1973. Okay? One of my closest buddies that I used to talk to for a long time, and he retired, God bless him. He was in the on the nuclear forces side of things. And one of the things he told me is that the way the United States maintains its nuclear forces, it's a run to failure mentality. The younger guys that are coming on board that are keeping track of our nuclear arsenal or maintaining it, so to speak, right? So it doesn't become non-effective. They're just doing the bare minimum. Okay, so it is a wonder if even 20% of our nuclear arsenal, quote unquote, is even functioning. Yeah. Let that be a detriment. This is why Putin says, before your missiles will even leave the silos, those who push the button will never find out if those missiles have even hit their target.
Wow. Yep.
That's the difference between a Mach 20, a Mach 10, 15, or Mach 20 hypersonic versus a 1973 Trident 3, Trident 2 and a Minuteman 3 missile. There's no comparison. The United States is 3 generations behind in missile technology in comparison to the Russians. They're at least a generation and a half behind the Chinese. That's how far behind the ball we are. But you know what we're great at? Marketing BS. We're wonderful at marketing BS.
Yeah, absolutely.
So 2023, gentlemen, it's going to be rough for America, man. It's going to be rough for much of the English-speaking world. Yeah. So batten down the hatches, buckle up, and pucker up.
Yeah. Thank you, V, for that. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for a great roundtable discussion. We're running short on time here, so we need to close this out. Martin, Alex, Matt, thank you so much, and V as well. Great roundtable today. Let's do this. Let's plan something, maybe perhaps early next year. So thank you for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being on. God bless. Godspeed.
God bless. Thank you, CJ.